Great to be here and see all of these wonderful faces. As Denise said, I have a new book out, and I think it's perfect for all of you. It's called Alpha Girls, and it really taught me a new way of thinking about success and how women succeed. It was really mind-expanding for me, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, because I think it will be very relatable to all of you. So we open with Joan Jett. Why Joan Jett, besides the fact that it's just a great song? So Joan Jett is what I call, and this is going to be the subject of my talk, Joan Jett is what I call a tempered radical. She's an everyday radical. She made success in her career through incremental steps. When you think about the lyrics of this song, I don't give a damn about my reputation. You're living in the past, it's a new generation. A girl can do what she wants to do. So that was not an kind of FU to society. That was Joan Jett really ignoring the smack talk. It was Joan Jett at age 14 standing there with her Gibson guitar in her hand, ignoring the guys who said girls can't play rock and roll. It was Joan Jett finding a way incrementally to make herself an astounding success in an industry that didn't seem to want her. So that's what I love about Joan Jett and why the opening song. So be an everyday radical. First, what is a radical? A radical is someone who advocates for thorough social or political reform. And we need these types of radicals. We need these change agents who disrupt the status quo, who give fiery speeches. But there's another type of radical. Again, going back to this term that I've landed on, tempered radicals or everyday radicals. Those who affect change by working within a system until they go kind of from navigating to pioneering. So you're going to meet the women of Alpha Girls and hear their stories, and I hope walk away inspired. Again, what really brought this change in my thinking around how women succeed is the reporting that I did for Alpha Girls. Alpha Girls is the story of 4 women who found ways to succeed in venture capital and in tech. And they helped finance and build some of the most significant companies of our day. And yet their stories had largely been written out of history. So I studied these stories. I spent a lot of time with the women and with other astounding women, including one you're going to hear from next, Kara Golden. And again, I followed their personal lives and their professional lives because the lives of women are very, very complex. So going back to this theme of what is a radical, this is Rosa Parks, and she was a radical. And history is rich with this type of radical, where her one defiant act of refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white man sparks a civil rights movement. That is a radical, right? That is someone who will not compromise, who will not back down. And again, the world needs these sort of radicals. I love this, her quote, "I knew someone had to take the first step, and I made up my mind not to move." So that's a radical. Now getting into the tempered radicals, these everyday radicals, who I think are more like the rest of us. And that is, think about Georgia O'Keeffe. So Georgia O'Keeffe, she learned to paint kind of these dismal, low-toned paintings like the men to prove she could before she turned to these bright desert flowers that really made her a giant of American modernism. Similarly, you have like Margaret Thatcher, who took elocution lessons so her voice could be better heard, and she was heard. These things suggest team player, right? And that's very much true. But it was also about self-preservation and self-advancement. So now we're going to get into the fun story of the Alpha Girls, and I'm telling you stories of 4 women, the 4 main characters of this book. And characters, they are characters, but they're true stories. So, and you see the illustrations here. I did something different for this book than my previous books. I created an Instagram version of the book. So I winnowed it down to about 12 scenes and created these illustrations. So you will not see the illustrations in the book or the language, "you're fired, dude," but you will on Instagram. So MJ Elmore, she is this woman who comes from Indiana, was a girl who just loved to play in the cornfields, happened to be very good at math, made it to Purdue, drives west in this old Ford Pinto. She's coming out to get a job at a newish company called Intel. And she's driving west in this old Ford Pinto. The floorboards were rusted out. As she takes that exit for famed Sand Hill Road, she can literally see the road rushing by below. And she starts out on this journey in Silicon Valley. Intel, goes to get her MBA at Stanford, and lands a job at IVP, a venture firm on Sand Hill Road. Goes on to become one of the first women in history to make partner at a venture capital firm. And so at this point in this scene I'm going to talk about, she's 28 years old, and she has to fire a man who's twice her age. And this was the first, she's the only woman at this firm, and nobody really knows how this is going to play out. So she goes to fire this guy, and he's twice her age, he's this European guy, he's kind of swarthy, his eyes have a habit of always giving her a look up and down every time they meet. So the company had been underperforming, and now MJ had learned that he had been sleeping with an employee. So she looks at him and she talks about the financial problems, and she tells him what she's learned about the employee, and then she says, "You're fired." And he looks at her indignantly and says, "I'm not going to be fired by a woman." So MJ, what does she do? So MJ she's thinking to herself first, he's fine being funded by a woman, but he won't be fired by a woman. But she looks to her right, she kind of looks to her left, she pretends to look around her, and she says, "Well, I'm the only one you've got. You are fired." What this did is it diffused a potentially tense situation by using humor. And so not only was it successful for MJ in that moment, and humor is a great tool that women can use to diffuse tense situations at work, but what it did is when the news got back to her colleagues, her peers at IVP, who were all men, again, they didn't know how a woman would do because they just didn't have any other women at the firm at that level. So when the word got back, they were like, this is how, if MJ handled it this way, this is how other women in this same situation would probably handle it. So it was a win for MJ, and it was a win for women in the eyes of these men. And just an important, there's so many takeaways in this book. So this is a great scene. I love this. Another one is, another woman alpha girl is Sonia Hoel Perkins. Sonia was from the South, blonde, blue-eyed Southerner who went to Harvard Business School, comes west, and lands her dream job at Menlo Ventures. So here she is. She's a partner track associate. She's about 27, 28 years old. She's invited to this skiing, kind of banking boondoggle in Sun Valley. And she's sitting in the lodge, and she's one who enjoys après-ski more than the actual skiing. She had maybe skied 6 times in her life with her church group. But she's there, so she's one of the few women there, maybe the only woman who was actually an associate, or one of the only women venture capitalists who was there. So she's enjoying lunch, she's thinking she's done for the day, and up saunters Tom Weissel. And Tom Weissel was a legend in investment banking, macho guy, and he saunters up, and he's got his posse in tow, and he says, "Sonia, I signed you up, you're in the race." She's looking like deer in a headlight, and he's surrounded by his guys, and they're all staring at her, waiting for her reaction. And in that moment, she has to make a decision. Is she going to say, "No, I'd rather not," or is she going to go for it? So she decides to go for it. She's like, sure, that's great. I'm in the race. So that afternoon, she's there in her puffy Patagonia jacket. She's up on this snowy precipice, looking down at this icy chute-like run. They had flags up and everything, and she was literally competing against former Olympic skiers and Navy SEALs who Weissel had a habit of hiring to turn into investment bankers. So Sonia has this philosophy of obstacles are my allies, and she looked at this, but there she was, again, on this snowy precipice, feeling, as she describes it, very much like the Grinch's dog Max, looking over, fearful this was not going to end well. But she takes off, and she's like, one step at a time, I can make it. And she takes it one flag, one chute at a time, miraculously makes it down unscathed to the bottom of the hill. There's Weissel and his posse, thumbs up. She made it, it was fantastic, so little victory there. But that night at dinner, she finds out she's seated to Tom Weissel's right, the coveted spot. All the sharp-elbowed bankers wanted that seat, and the jockeying was intense. So there was Sonia, who was seated at the right hand of Weissel. They all got a trophy that night. But again, her win was also a win for women. And Sonia also says, you can't win if you don't play the game. So the message there is get in the game, play it, network. So this is a wonderful story. This is one of the Alpha Girls, Teresa Gao, who grew up in this blue-collar town on the East Coast, first-generation immigrant, makes her way again she goes to Brown Engineering, first from her town to make it to an Ivy League, magna cum laude engineering, comes west, goes to Stanford, gets her MBA. You can tell these are all underachievers, and works for a startup during the dot-com boom, and then joins Excel Partners as a partner track associate. And so literally her first task when she started at Excel, she was told, you need to entertain these guys who are coming in to pitch this new search engine, and develop a rapport with them, and then lead them to the partners meeting. So it turns out this is Sergey Brin and Larry Page who are coming in to talk about Google. And every VC was trying to get an investment in the company at that time. And Teresa, so she's super competitive. When we see her earlier in the book, she, can you all hear me okay? Okay. So she, loved to compete. She was always at Brown University in this, hanging out at this neighborhood bar and beating the competition. Everybody underestimated her abilities. And so there she is, facing off against Sergey Brin across the foosball table, and she's going in for her middle rod, pull shot and her spin shot, and her competitive juices are flowing, and then she stops herself. She's like, oh my God. Sometimes playing to win means making sure you lose, right? So all of these women made these really smart, strategic decisions, these incremental victories that added up. But you notice in this illustration that Teresa was wearing what was then the VC uniform of the day. And that was not a great look for most women. It was khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt, but she wouldn't give up something she loved. Even though she was adopting this uniform, she would always wear these really fancy, really expensive designer shoes. And in the same way, think about like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So she wears, of course, the black Juris robe, which was made for men, and it has the opening for a tie. But she adopts these beautiful feathered collars, ornamental collars. So think about these little statements that may be an act of preservation, that may be an act of defiance. It may be, in this case, against a macho culture. But again, small acts of defiance adding up to something significant. So next we have Magdalena Yeşil, who is the fourth of the Alpha Girls. So Magdalena came from Istanbul, Turkey. She arrived with $43 and 9 gold bracelets to her name, knowing no one. She went to Stanford, got an electrical engineering degree, worked in the computer lab at night, never had to sell any of those bracelets. She goes on to become a very successful entrepreneur, although she describes her career as kind of like a bumper car, mistakes made, lessons learned, a new path found. She becomes an early guru for e-commerce, is out talking about it at the same time Jeff Bezos is. Then she is named at some point, not long after, as Entrepreneur of the Year. So her trajectory is going up. She's hired at a venture capital firm, USVP. And in this scene here, she's made success with her investments, and she is now being offered this job going from a venture partner, an investing partner, to a general partner. And Magdalena's like, well, that's great, great. What's my carry? What is my percentage of the profits here? And so she was told a certain percentage, and she did the math, how many partners are there, and you divide up what she considered equitable, and she said, thank you, but no thanks. She didn't think it was equitable. She didn't think it represented the value that she brought to the table as well. And she really meant it. You know, when you are negotiating, you can't often bluff. You have to mean it. And she was fine walking away. So about 2 hours later, the partner comes back and ups her carry, and she accepts. It was not about being greedy. It was about what was equitable and standing up for what she believed her value was. So a week later, I love this scene, this image, this moment. A week later, she goes to the general partners meeting, and it's all glass conference room, and she's the only woman. She's the only general partner now, the firm is head, and on the other side of the glass wall, all assistants, secretaries, other personnel, and they're all women. And they start cheering for her because her win was their win. And so she had set a precedent that was important to her, but she also wanted it to be for the women who would follow. So what this says about these women who went from navigating to pioneering. So you have MJ Elmore, who did the firing. So she goes on to back some of the really critical software and computer companies that became the infrastructure, really, of the modern day computer industry. Sonia Hoel Perkins, who was our downhill ski racer, she goes on to back companies that really make the internet safer and faster. Teresa Gao, the girl who started out in this kind of redneck town on the East Coast, first job flipping burgers at Burger King, today is considered one of the most successful venture capitalists anywhere with a personal net worth of over 500 million. She has chased down deals including Facebook, Trulia, Imperva, Forescout, and now runs her own venture firm, Aspect Ventures, with another fantastic woman. And Magdalena, last but certainly never least. So Magdalena went on to help found a little company called Salesforce.com, working with Mark Benioff from idea through IPO. So these women, again, they went from, remember this, from navigating to trailblazing. They had to work within a system, learn to play by the rules that existed, that were written very much by other people. They navigated that. They perfected those rules until they got to a point in their careers where they could start writing the rules themselves. And that's what's happening. And these women and other women like them who have been pioneers, but again, had to navigate before they could trailblaze, they now are investing in women-founded companies at unprecedented rates. They are starting their own venture firms. They're creating this amazing sisterhood, this network that is potentially transforming venture and tech and having this great impact. A lot of potential here on women founders, on the dialogue, on who gets funded. It's my belief that if venture doesn't diversify, tech won't diversify. So it's kind of the start of the food chain. Only 2% of venture dollars historically have gone to women-founded firms. $130 billion was deployed by venture capitalists last year. $2.5 billion went to women-founded firms. So that's something that has to change and that is changing. So again, these women looked at their lives and careers as these transformational outcomes can be forged through incremental means. So we started with Joan Jett. I'm going to start wrapping up here with Joan Jett. I love this quote: "Other people will call me a rebel, but I just feel like I'm living my life and doing what I want to do." Sometimes people call that a rebellion, especially when you're a woman. So I would love for all of you to think of yourselves as an everyday radical, as a tempered radical, as someone who goes out and fights for change, but do it in a way that others will want to join you. Go out, push for the things that are important to you, the causes, the people, the movements, but again, pull others along with you. Make it so that others want to join that. Be an everyday radical. Don't wait for a Gandhi, don't wait for a King, don't wait for a Mandela or a Malala. Be your own Gandhi, King, Mandela, or Malala. Go out and change the world like the women of my book did, even if it is, and this is how I think most of us operate, through these incremental wins, these small victories that can add up to something significant. So thank you all very much. It was great being here, and I'm very accessible. Reach out to me and tell me your stories, because also I'll leave you with one more fact, and that is we have 3,500 years of recorded history. 0.5% of that history has been dedicated to the stories of women. So that needs to change. Men, I love you, but you have had your day. It's now time to shed light, to spotlight women's successes, women's victories, women's stories, to share that and raise other women up. Remember that it's not boasting when it's based on fact. Thank you very much.